Hello, and welcome to Reveal's 2020 webinar series, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Kelly, and I'm going to be your host for today's webinar. This year's webinar series, we provide insights on how to best leverage your SAP asset as it relates to your business and how each functional area will be affected by S/4HANA. Today, we set the stage for turning SAP into an asset by aligning key SAP S/4HANA production planning master data objects. As we get started with today's discussion, the webinar will last approximately 30 to 45 minutes, followed by a question and answer period at the end. So if you could please capture your questions in the question or chat section. And we will also record the webinar as it's going to be available on our website under the resources tab later today. At this time, I would like to introduce you to today's speaker, Sammy Nugum. Sammy is an accomplished and certified production planning integration advisor at Reveal. With over 22 years of experience working in supply chain in a variety of advisor roles, Sammy has considerable industry experience in a range of business sectors, including IT, education, discrete, process, and repetitive manufacturing environments, and extensive training, delivery, strategy, and management experience in the role of SAP PPPI lead advisor, team leader, and academy programmer owner. And with that, I would like to turn this presentation over to Sammy.
Thank you, Kelly, and good morning, everyone. As Kelly said, my name is Sammy Nugum. What we will cover today as an agenda for this is to look at our aligned PP master data objects. We're going to touch on some success factors that touch on production planning and the implications from a quality perspective. And as we go through this webinar, I'll look at bring to your attention some of the key considerations that you need to be aware of as you try to align your PP master data to support the production planning and control process. I will obviously have a few pointers for you as we go through this presentation, and we'll close that in a quick wrap up towards the end of the webinar. All right, so without much ado, I want us to touch on this master data. So we often consider master data as data that remains in the system for extended periods of time without needing to be changed. Now, what does a statement like that mean? What does it translate into from a PP perspective? So I want to share with you the way I tend to think about master data objects. I tend to think of this as business objects that represent, if you like, agreed pieces of information that is shared across the organization. I also tend to think of this as objects that help you answer questions like who, what, when, and how. All right, and some of you might recognize those as the key, if you like, adjectives that describe what happens from a manufacturing equation point of view. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But think of these business objects as objects that provide context to your business activities and the transactions that you perform. You also like to think of this as objects that help you support or help support the integration of your business processes. And also, perhaps finally, objects that expand your ability to make sense of the activities as you group, you categorize, and you prioritize your reporting for that matter, as the case may be. So that's how I tend to think of the essence of master data, and in this context, if you like, PP master data. So I want us to ask ourselves, what should an aligned set of PP master data actually do for you? To answer that question, I'd like us to think about the overall production planning process. So I'm sure that a lot of you have seen this picture on the left of your screen in many places. But let us just summarize, be very brief on this particular picture, and say that as you obviously look at the top of that, you look at your sales and operations planning, that's you're looking at stuff, right? What determines your, if you like, your production rates, your forecast, your strategic goals. And as you go down that process flow, you're moving towards your operational activities. So what I think about as an aligned set of master data is that it must support MRP, right? MRP is that calculator, it's that sub-process that helps you optimize your inventory levels and maximize your service levels, right? As I just mentioned a few seconds ago, it helps you answer the key manufacturing equation, right? What do we have? What do you have in terms of inventory? What is it that you want to make? Yeah, what does it take to make it? And what do you have to get, right? Effectively, that defines your shortage list. So an aligned set of PP master data must be able to support MRP. I also like to think that an aligned set of master data must be able to support your capacity requirements plan, right? Because that is the window into what you want to do compared against what is possible. Your capacity requirements plan. Not only that, I also like to think of that as an aligned set of data being able to support your detailed scheduling. It is not just what you want to do, but it's what you're capable of doing. So your detailed scheduling allows you to answer that question. I also would like to think of an aligned set of master data as supporting that costing process, right? Closes the loop. You have the MRP2 loop, which is that feedback loop for your cost projections. What you thought you were going to make and what you actually did, and obviously able to compare what those costs were. Yes, to define, if you like, what your cost of goods manufactured are. And then to close this particular loop, I like to also think of your an aligned set of master data as supporting your production execution process, which, if you like, is a measure of how well you did. So an aligned set of master data, and I keep using PP obviously to refer to our production planning, must provide you with that complete vision of your manufacturing process. So that's how I like to think of an aligned set of master data. So as we go through this, the rest of this webinar, I want to bring to your attention a few things that you need to consider when you're trying to make sure that what you are implementing or what you are upgrading to or what you're migrating to supports the production planning process. So to do that as well, I want to go ahead and share with you some of this graphic that I see that you have here. All right, so the point I'm going to make here is start by ensuring that your master data objects align with your operating model, the type of manufacturing process or process that you may choose to run or that you might run in your organization. So if you operate in a repetitive manufacturing space, ensure that your production lines and your rate routings are appropriately defined. Yes, and just because the system allows you to use what we refer to as reference operation sets and so on, does not mean that you should go ahead and use it for everything. And I say that because these are practical examples that we see out there as we go around doing this task. So the point I want to leave you with here is that horses for courses, as dictated by the tools that SAP provides to support those different manufacturing models that you might have. Remember that how well you're able to execute will be dictated by how well your data aligns with your business rules. That's some of the things we're going to talk about as well, because we want to make sure that the critical elements of master data, yes, in this case of PP, are able to drive the business decisions that you make so that you begin to work by exception, at least your users work by exception and not by working too hard. They work smarter, not harder. All right, you manage by exception. That's what you want to make sure that your master data will do for you. So let's take a look at some key considerations as well. And I want to introduce you to something we call our value funnel. All right. So I have just said to you that if your business data does not align with your business rules, you will not be able to manage by exception, which is what you want to really do. All right. And what happens? So if you look on the left side of this funnel, you can see a situation here where we have at the beginning of that a misalignment between our business rules and the business behaviors. Right? If your users do not trust the data that you have in the system, what do? They lose trust in that what is supposed to be your formal system, and they begin to work outside the system. So effectively, those spreadsheets begin to define an informal system that they're using to try and run your business. So your objective must be to change that behavior, and you do so by ensuring that the business data, the business rules, so the bottom of that funnel, you're looking at things like your recipes, your bombs, your MRP controller settings, your ATP, checking groups and rules, your lead times, lot sizes, and so on. We're going to touch on those things. What you want to do is to ensure that these are correct and appropriate. All right, correct will be dependent on your business situation that we understand, which is why we provide the service that we do. All right. So you've got to ask your question. Are your people working harder instead of smarter? Do they manage by exception or not? Are they using the tools that are in the system to allow you to monitor the behaviors and correct them? Are your business processes so cumbersome that nobody can make sense out of them? Basically, are your business objects, in this case, our PP objects, optimized? Those are some of the questions that you want to do. So what you want to do is relentlessly drive to align those business behaviors and the rules. And in doing so, you will be able to reduce the data, and you will be able to move towards gaining the value that this business funnel shows you towards the right of the screen. Okay, and what I'm going to say here as well is that as we go through a process like this, right, you do go through what we call the valley of change, right? Initially, there's that excitement, of course, as the work has to be done to get those business rules and the business data to align. You may go through frustration, but then your users begin to see, yes, those aha moments begin to come, and that is what, if you like, drives success. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the success factors that you need to be aware of. All right, and let me do that by asking you this question. How often do you hear your users make statements like, oh, that setting or value or process parameter no longer applies today? All right, if you hear that, then it tells you that your data set doesn't pass the test of accuracy, of validity, of relevance, timeliness, completeness, and consistency. Because the quality of what you measure is critical. And I just want to touch on a few of these. Yes, if your data is inaccurate, it will lack purpose. It will not be used, and it will become unusable. If your data is invalid, it also loses its importance in making any planning decisions. And I'd like to make the statement here as well. Don't look at the output. Don't look at the outcome of a process. Look at the process itself. If you fix the problems that are associated with the process, you can guarantee the output. If your data is not relevant, it leads to questions like, oh, do we really need it? If it's inconsistent, if your data is not consistent, obviously, it will lead to misaligned results. That means you can't compare one output from another. If your data is not timely, is not delivered in a timely manner, it becomes an inadequate source of information. And if your data is not complete, it naturally leads to workarounds. Those spreadsheets proliferate. And now that's what we talk about when we say working harder, not smarter. And what you want to make sure is that you build in that dependability, that reliability, all right? Because with that, you gain the predictability and insights of your business, of your manufacturing process in this case. And that is, if you like, would be a good segue into automation functions. And as we hear, artificial intelligence, IIoT. So those are some of the key success factors that I want you to keep in mind as you look and analyze your PP master data. Yes, and let's move on and look at how we go ahead and manage some of that data in an integration supply chain. And I'll go ahead and make this statement. Yes, let me be very clear about that statement. As an organization, you want a lot less debating about conflicting information coming from your SAP system. All right, so let me share with you some viewpoints, some structural and data viewpoints. You must develop a culture that recognizes the upstream and downstream dependability of everyone that is involved in your process. You must make sure that changes are aligned with your data and that they take place in an environment where communication is timely and immediate. And also, don't forget to think about exception processes. Where your standard process cannot work, you must have clearly defined exception management processes for elements that do not adhere to those key ones. Otherwise, everybody will develop their own exception process. From a data perspective, you must make sure that your users are responsible and accountable. You might recall that from our value funnel screen. Your data sets must support your process so they avoid building those satellite systems that we're talking about. And you must also maintain a process improvement process that seeks and corrects bad data. All right, so you must ensure that you have a team that has its antenna constantly looking out for silo functions, right? And able to establish why they exist and get on top of eliminating them. I'm sure all of us listening to this webinar believe in a single system of records. Yes, and the existence of spreadsheets, satellite systems, silo functions actually contradict that belief. Make sure all bad data is fixed, because if it's not, it will show up somewhere, right? Remember the key thing that we said, our interpretation of what master data is supposed to do for us. Make sure that you fix all bad data. All right, so what I want to do is now proceed to touch on some key objects, key master data objects, PP data objects, all right? And the first one that I want to do is to look at a mature master record. All right, we know that your mature master record is that key organizational entity that is used everywhere. All right, it's at the heart of our organizational activities. So what are some of the things that you need to do? You need to be looking at? Well, I will say to you, you need to make sure you gain control and understanding of things like your planning strategies. Do your people understand how they work? Are there other strategies that could best support your business processes? Do you operate in an assemble to order, make to stock, make to order, engineer to order environment? Or do you need to use hybrid strategies? And if you do your people understand how to use those? I'll also go as far as to say, do not just default to basic lot sizing procedures as well. They are typical of what happens when you implement, right? And you migrate from one system to another, right? Those simple default things or settings may not be the ideal settings. Yes, use practical approaches, right? You may have to test some procedures to make sure that what you are using, the settings that you're using are optimal. You may even want to ask yourself a question. How do you manage your safety stock? Do your people understand, yes, the differences between dynamic safety stock, static safety stock? Do they understand what your safety buffers do? Yeah. Do your products operate in, are your products say seasonal or some seasonal? Where dynamic safety stock might actually be the best way to do. Do they know how to use the tools, the analysis tools in the system to try and understand past behavior of these products, also predict future behavior to go ahead and make some of these settings correctly? What strategies are you using for your in-house production time, for example? Are you scheduling your routings or recipes and updating your material master records? Or are you just maintaining a default time in the material master record? And what you see on the right side of your screen are just some screenshots about some of the changes that S/4HANA brings to the table for us. Some of the changes that are taking place have taken place in the repetitive space, and some of the key objects which we'll talk about shortly as well that are affected. So I'll go ahead and talk about our work centers as well. We understand, we know, certainly from a production planning perspective, that this is one of the most critical data objects, right? So we should be asking ourselves some very important questions. How well are these work centers, resources, or production lines, depending on the environment that you work in? How well have they been maintained? Yes. Have your intervals, have the shifts and shift definitions been maintained? Are they being maintained correctly? Are you using the right standard value keys with the right standard values? Have you maintained the right capacity categories for those work centers? Do they operate according to the plant calendar, or should you be managing this with a different factory calendar? Are the formulas that you have maintained correct? Have they been defined correctly? What is the basis for scheduling? What is the basis for calculating your capacity loads? Yeah. How will your activities be costed? Yes, are the activity types for the cost centers defined and maintained correctly? All right, so while we may not be able to give you specific answers because you operate in different environments and your rules will be different, your version of the correct data will be different. These to me are some of the key elements that you need to look at when you are setting up your PP master data to support that production planning and control process. We'll take a look at routings as well. All right, we know the yes, your routings, your work centers, your resources or production lines effectively, get used in your routings or rate routings or recipes. All right, so and we know that your routings are defined, that sequence of operations or steps that you perform within the organization to manufacture a product, right? Obviously, taking into account the resources of that particular plant. So as you develop these routings, ask yourself some of these questions as well, right? Do those routings actually capture your true process sequence? Yes. Do the control keys that you have maintained behave as expected? Are you going to stage materials at different operations during the production process? And if so, have the components been allocated? Are you going to backflush some of this? Are the activity rates, the production rates that you've actually defined in those routings, recipes or rate routings, are they a true representation of your process capability? When you detail schedule, will you be doing setup optimization? And if so, have you maintained the right data set to support that setup time optimization? Do you perform subcontract or external processes or operations? Are they defined in your routing? And if so, have they been done correctly? Now, one of the things I want you to also remember is if your routings are not correct, capacity planning won't be of much use to you. So I'll go out to make this statement. Your routing should be somewhere in the region of 95 to 98% accurate to support MRP. I think as we say, that 80-20 rule still applies for your routings. What you will find is that 80% of your activities likely take place with 20% of the routings. So as you go ahead to try and optimize these objects, take a look, home in on those 20% and make sure that the data, the business data, actually reflect what your business rules should be before you start going down to less used ones. So here comes our bills of materials. We know it's that key foundation for the planning system. I made the statement earlier that if your bill of material is not correct, an MRP is not going to be quite tolerant. It's not going to be tolerant about that. All right? MRP is less tolerant of BOM errors than it is with your inventory records. So like your routings, you should be aiming for something like 98% plus. And I will even go as far as to make the statement today. In the world in which we live today, is there a reason why they shouldn't be 100% accurate? So some of the key things to ensure is that your structure must represent the way you schedule those products. Also remember, it is the instrument that MRP uses to translate what your master schedule is into specific components, right? Applying that manufacturing equation that I talked about earlier, right? What we want to do, what we have, what we need to get, and what we have in available to us. So as you try to understand and make your BOMs work for you, aim to make sure that your users, those who maintain the master data, understand what your item categories do, for example, how to manage the quantities, yes, whether or not you're going to be using distribution functions, yes, how your supply areas are going to support you for staging materials from the warehouse, how your scrap factors work. And also with S/4HANA now, understand the key relationship between those, your bills of materials, your routings, and your production versions. And we'll talk about that momentarily as well. So touch on production versions. Okay, and to the right of this screen, you see the changes that S/4HANA is bringing to us from ECC. So those migrating will obviously be aware of this. But these are the things that I want you to think about, right? What is our production version? Well, I like to think of it as the tool in SAP, that piece of master data in SAP that helps define a method of manufacturing our products. Yes, so as I just stated, the production versions are even more important now in the S/4HANA space because it is that tool, it is the key pointer to which bills of materials and which routings you're going to use or the system should use. So in organizing your production versions, I would say concentrate on the proper definition of things like your lot sizes. Yes, develop methods, mechanisms on how to deal with obsolete versions. Yes, carefully consider your validity dates. Carefully consider whether or not how you prioritize these will be driven by the use of quota arrangements or not. If you operate in the repetitive manufacturing space, make sure that the settings are also compliant. And I will say it's amazing what we see out there. Probably made that statement already once. It's amazing what you see out there. All right, so those to me are some of the key objects. Of course, depending on the business process or sub-processes that you implement, you may need to bring into play other pieces of master data. But these are the key master data objects that I wanted to draw to your attention. So I want to turn towards data quality in a little bit more. All right, so if we choose to work smarter, not harder, then I would like to say to you that it is because we value how much time we spend in transactions. We want to save that time. It should also be because we hate duplicating effort. We want to make sure that our data supports that. It should also because SAP, S4 is your single source of the truth, and you want to keep it that way. It will also be because you are confident that when you choose to run production campaigns, you can rely on the outputs from the system. It's also that when you make decisions, they will be based on dependable inputs. And that would be because obviously you have the confidence in the environment that you operate. An environment, if you like, that is accurate, is consistent, is complete, it's valid, because your data integrity builds trust within your teams. And so you don't have to rely too much on your long-serving resources. Not that they are not important, of course they are. But you want to be confident about what you have in the system, and it should not be in somebody's head. So I'll proceed to make a couple more statements for you, right? Under what I refer to as our key considerations. All right, so we've touched on a few areas here. We've touched on your mature master records, on your bills of materials, on your routings, your work centers, production versions. So as you do, I want to make some slightly more generic statements to you. Endeavor to simplify, not complicate your manufacturing process. So when you can, simplify your routings. And what do we see out there? Well, we see routings, we see recipes where every action that takes place is an operation or a phase. That's not what you should be doing. Flatten your bills of materials if you can, if it's possible. When you make changes to your master data, be in control of the upstream and downstream impacts. Avoid actions that may lead to the creation of that informal system that we have talked about. Yes, stay on top of your data with regular audits. Not only that, empower the users and hold them accountable. Make sure that your data objects support the planning process. No ifs, no buts. So I've got a couple more slides to go through to try and wrap this up. Let me say this. We talked about data, data. So I want to make the statement that when somebody says the system told me so, what we want to be clear about is to say that is no longer acceptable. Your data sets and processes should not be so complicated as to be unusable. They must pass the data quality test of integrity. Make sure that your process logic is obvious. I always say that the ultimate test of sophistication is simplicity, because simplicity is that cornerstone of understanding. It's also the cornerstone of accountability. Your goal for adopting and meeting the right balance between sophistication and simplicity lies in making sure that your business process logic is obvious. Well, as they say, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. All right, so let's make some of these statements or share some of this. Plan so that you can address the what, the hows of your data and your processes. Schedule so you can reduce the delays. You don't burn time unnecessarily. Because we believe that an aligned set of PP master data will ensure the smoothness of your manufacturing process or processes. And that's all I have for you today. I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you, Sammy. Looks like we have just a few questions for you. The first question is, on a scale of 1 to 5, how representative is your PP master data relative to your process capability?
That's a question to me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, obviously, we go in to do this analysis, right? So what I would say to you is that for the most part, nowhere beyond 2 or 3, as we audit and assess a lot of our clients. Nowhere between, beyond 2 or 3 on a scale of 1 to 5. All right. And this is usually driven by the fact that, yes, as part of implementations, yes, you go in, you extract, you convert, you load, right? The training is quick, is fast because you've got deadlines to meet. So the users are not empowered. They're not usually knowledgeable. It's easy to ask a question. Do you know what this particular parameter does? I think I do. Can you explain that to me? And that's what you get. So part of what we do as an organization is to go beyond training. We educate. Any other question?
We do have another question from the audience here. Can you clarify what you meant by flattening the routing recipe?
All right. So flattening the routings or recipes. So what I explained there was the fact that if you've got a production line and you perform certain operations in step 1, step 2, or operation 10, operation 20, 30, 40, it doesn't mean that every time you tighten a bolt that should represent an operation in the routing. All right. It doesn't mean that every time you add water. I always say that only if there are specific activities that you measure at every stage of your production process do you need to maintain that as an operation in the routing. So that's what I mean. Do not put in operations and phases just for the sake of doing so.
Okay,
Another
it
question?
looks like the last question that we have, it looks like, is how reliant are your planner and schedulers on the output of MRP?
How reliant are they? All right. So I guess you can answer that question simply by asking your schedulers, when they go to schedule, if you ask the question, does it take this long to run this particular product? How often do we hear, no, I use this spreadsheet because this spreadsheet is a true representation of what actually happens on the shop floor. So that's what I mean by making sure that your routings capture your process capability. Because if they don't, if your routing says one thing for your run rates and your the scheduler is using something else, then those two things those data objects are not aligned. Those two people are not aligned, right? That's the satellite. That's the informal system that they have developed already. And you want to put a stop to that. You want to bring that knowledge. If that scheduler's knowledge or planner's knowledge is a true representation of your process capability, you want to make sure that is brought into the system because that is part of your business rules. That's part of your business data. Any more?
Okay. Nope, that is, just a further question on what you had just asked. They said, what are your thoughts about group counters on routing?
What are my thoughts about group counters and routings? All right. Okay. So I would say it's not really a matter of thoughts, right? Why do you have multiple counters? You have multiple counters because you have different ways of manufacturing a product, right? You may store all of those under a single group, but those will represent multiple ways of making the product. All right. These are product specific. They should be product specific. So one of the comments I will make is we go to clients, and what do we have? We have one routing, one group counter, and products that operate on completely different run rates are assigned to that single routing and group counter. That will be wrong. So horses for courses. If you need to break that up, you break that up. Capacity, remember, MRP is no use to you if your routings are not correct, and your routings are no good to you if they're telling you about how you make one product when it should be the times, the rates defined for another product. All right, so as many routings as are required to completely define everything that you do, all the data sets that are applicable to making a particular product. Any more?
Oh, no, that looks like all we have for today. But if anybody else has any further questions, we ask you to go ahead and reach out to us with the information here available on the screen. And then our webinar today will be available on our website under resources on our website, revealvalue.com. And then you'll also find all of our previously recorded webinars as well, with some other informative content like our white papers, success stories, and some other helpful tips and tools that we use. And our next webinar is going to be on July 15th, and that's going to be turning SAP into an asset by maximizing enterprise asset management. And that's going to be presented by Sean Ellis. And then we'll go ahead and get that information out to you in advance so you can attend. So I just want to say thank you, everybody. Have a great day, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.